Welcome to CCTV Under the Dome, where we examine moments in the legislature, what's going on in Montpelier to affect public policy, decision-making, community, your life. And we are honored to be here today with Senate Pro Tempore, Philip Ruth. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Yep. You've been in the Senate for 16 years and your 4th year as Senate Pro Tem.
Yeah, this is the end of my 15th year, and then next year will be
entering into your 16th year.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. So what I'm hoping you can do is just reflect on this past session. So the legislature, for those who don't know, runs from January in the year until about June, May or June. It's a citizen legislature. It's part-time citizen legislature. You may be working year-round as Senate Pro Tem in various summer committees, study committees, political work. But what was your impression of this last session?
Right. I think it's not so different from people's impressions of what's going on in the world today. So we live in unprecedented times, and the number of major emergencies has increased, and I would say skyrocketed since I came in 2011. And that's across the board. So climate change and flooding, resiliency, all the work we're doing to try to make ourselves more sustainable as the climate warms, just that has been a huge effort over the last 5 years, let's say.
So you started 2011, the year Irene hit.
Yes.
Which is sort of our big watershed moment, literally.
Right. And actually, I sent out a piece of campaign literature this past election cycle showing pictures of me cleaning up basements in Richmond in 2011 and then cleaning up the Barry Old Labor Hall a couple of years ago. And my point was that it doesn't just happen that the state gets ready for more flooding. It's a huge legislative lift because it goes against, in some moments and in some places, the wishes of developers, let's say. We have a housing crisis, but we don't want to be building in the floodplain. We have a housing crisis, but we don't want to be building in wetland areas. And so that requires incredibly careful legislative work. Chris Bray, Senator Chris Bray, when he was in the Senate, did yeoman's work on all of that, passing what we call the Flood Safety Act, which I think of as the watershed, no pun intended, piece of legislation in that area. But that's just one. Then if you look at what's going on with the federal government, they have created, because of the president's, I would say, fundamentally immature approach to his job, they have created emergencies for legislatures around the country. So rescinding money that had been promised, pulling back grants in areas where we really need it. So the funding is all under threat. But beyond that, we have ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, acting as a kind of free-floating secret police that are moving around the country, masked and committing all sorts of offenses, to my way of thinking, against the Constitution. So we have been trying to address all of those things simultaneously. That's not even, I mentioned the housing crisis, but the crisis around fentanyl and addiction and homelessness, that is a massive crisis in and of itself. And then the healthcare system, from insurance to hospitals and doctors and providers, is all under financial strain. So it's a lot.
Let's talk about, so just in the last, and from the little bit of time that we spent in the legislature, it seemed like people were last year still getting along with one another, still talking across political parties, still focused on Vermonters' interests.
Yep.
But can you just highlight some of the things that came out of the Senate, some of the things that came out of both bodies that really speak to meeting some of those needs? Yeah.
Well, if you go back to the last election, I've said it before, I'll say it again, it was the worst night in politics for me. We lost 6 senators.
And by that you mean Democrats?
And for me personally, you know,
Okay.
I lost friends
Okay.
in that election. But yeah, Democrats lost the so-called supermajority. And in the Senate, we went from 23 votes down to 17. And Republicans had 13. So if we lost 2 votes, we lost the issue. In other words, if 2 people broke ranks and went along with Republicans, with John Rogers, the lieutenant governor, a Republican, breaking the tie,
Yeah.
they would carry the day.
Yeah. And so for folks who don't know, in this case, there's an even number in the Senate, and if there is a tie, the lieutenant governor
Yes.
breaks that tie.
Right, and so, so to me, that was a message directly from the voters: work together. And so we did. And the number one issue of the day was the education reform bill,
Yep.
the transformation bill, we called it. And the ultimate vote on that was 17 to 12, and the 17 were 7 Democrats, 10 Republicans. And that is more bipartisan than I have ever seen on a piece of legislation in my time there of that import.
And you came down on the 17 side.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So House leadership, Senate leadership, and bipartisan majorities in both houses produced that bill and voted for it. But that's exactly what I think voters wanted. They were feeling incredibly strained and stressed by property taxes. They responded as voters should do, right?
Yeah.
They went out in great numbers. They made that clear. And so we worked with Republicans to provide relief in several different ways. So this past property tax bill, we brought down to a near flat rate. And that was, again, not easy, and it was in partnership with the governor and Republicans.
So how is that going to play out in this upcoming session?
Well, we're going to have to, as with any big piece of legislation, we'll have to revisit it, and we'll have to see how it's being implemented. Usually, you know, when you pass something of that size, you pass a companion bill the following year. So we may do that sort of oversight and accounting and touching up. But basically, that bill we passed last year has about, I think, a 3-4 year timeline, and it's beginning its rollout, and it'll continue to work till 28, 29.
Yeah, there were a lot of folks that felt like it was just too fast, not the right people at the table, too many compromises. How do you respond to those folks? And some of those are your constituents here in Burlington.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
So I've been on the education, I was on the education committee for 10 years, chaired it for 4. I've paid attention to education issues my entire career because I'm an educator. What I will say is that you cannot change the system fundamentally and have broad agreement. It's not going to happen. So, for instance, the NEA opposed us very strongly because part of what's going on is that our system went from 125,000 kids to now less than 80,000 kids. And yet,
And over the course of what time frame?
over the course of the last 40 years,
Okay,
I would say.
okay.
So in that time, the educational establishment, both the infrastructure and the people, none of that has shrunk. It's all continued to grow. So eventually you hit a point where the number of kids is dropping dramatically and the number of educators is not. So it becomes a strain on property taxpayers.
And
So-
then the flip side is that though more is being asked of educators in the
Absolutely.
school systems to meet social needs as
Sure.
well as
Sure,
and test
although,
scores are not going up with those changes.
right,
Yeah.
and that's a concern as well.
Yeah.
So what we were looking to do is find ways to strengthen the system, but also to get rid of redundancies. So for instance, consolidation is a big part of this next session. We'll have a map-making committee that will come forward with new districts, and those districts theoretically will allow you to get rid of redundant administration and
So this is the
concentrate on.
5 districts, or are we not settled on
It's not settled.
how many
So,
districts?
so they're going to come back with at least 2 maps.
Okay.
And we'll see where it goes from there. But to your question, that was a bipartisan effort from the get-go, and we invited the governor in. He came with a plan. Then Democrats redid his plan, but kept some of the basic elements. And at the end of the day, he was willing to sign, and Republicans were willing to join with Democrats.
Yeah. Other highlights, I mean, the Ed bill was a huge highlight. Other highlights that you want to...
Yeah, people might not have heard of this, but it came to be called CHIP, and that's the Community Housing Infrastructure Program. And what that is, this is a little complicated, but we have something now called TIF, Tax Increment Financing Districts. And basically what it is, in a number of districts around the state, mostly urban districts or semi-urban, you can get a credit. You don't have to pay into the Ed fund as your building infrastructure that will ultimately contribute to the Ed fund. And so it allows, in effect, more money to go to building and development in areas where we need it. And there were people who made the argument, and it carried the day, that rural communities were not being properly represented by TIF districts. So again...
They may not have had a larger area to develop.
Yep. And so we came up with something called CHIP, and it is more developer-centric rather than district-centric. So a project.
Housing development.
Yes.
Yeah.
And others, but similar. So, you know, if you're a developer and you're going to be building 200 units somewhere, you can get a similar effect in your finances through the CHIP program that communities like Burlington and Winooski have gotten with the TIF program. That's estimated over the next 20 years to put $2 billion into housing, not that we're paying that out, but that we're forgiving that revenue that might otherwise be called for.
Yeah. So, but the flip side is it's a $2 billion tax delay potentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it brings all of those projects ultimately into the grand list, and it'll keep property taxes hopefully lower.
And does that take effect? Did that take effect July 1, 2025?
Yes, I believe it did. So the governor.
Have we seen any? Any response to that? At this
I don't
point?
know at this point. It's only been a month or two.
Yeah.
If we've seen projects drawing on that. But what I would say generally is over the last 5 years, we have put something like $1.5 billion into housing. And that's mostly federal money, which has unfortunately dried up now. But we're now, in lieu of the federal money, we're pivoting to creative ideas like CHIP.
Yeah. So we're going to get into a little more of the federal impacts, but any other highlights that you want to note?
Yeah,
this past session?
I mentioned ICE. That is a great concern for me because I don't feel like we've seen its fullest flower yet.
And there was nothing in this legislative session last year on ICE. Is that right?
No, there was. That's where I'm going.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So,
pardon me.
Yeah, no problem. So, you know, I think ICE, unfortunately, is going to become a part of our daily reality. I think they will be broadened in their use out from immigration, and they will start showing up in public squares and public streets. And I am very worried about that. But the things we did to try to deal with ICE, for one thing, in statute there was the ability for law enforcement agencies to join individually with ICE on the enforcement side. And so you could have a sheriff somewhere who said, and we've seen this in New Hampshire, you could have a sheriff that says, I believe in what ICE is doing, I'm going to take my department and join with them. So what we did was we changed the statute so that those law enforcement agencies could only join with ICE if the governor signed off. And the governor has indicated he doesn't want to sign off. So we closed that door. Then the other thing we did is called standby guardianship. So let's say ICE is targeting a family and they have a kid in school, and they know they're being targeted. They can set up preemptively a guardianship program that can go into effect like that if they are taken into custody. So they can, before the fact, they can say, I want my neighbor, I want my grandmother, I want my friend to be the guardian. They can do all the paperwork, simplified paperwork. And then if they are in fact taken into custody, that guardianship can protect their kids. Because our federal government, that is not their concern, what's happening to the children.
Yeah. And is there any indication of the impact of that legislation so far?
I don't believe so. I don't believe we've had a situation where it's come into play.
But yeah, I think I read Migrant Justice saying that there have been 77 ICE encounters with with folks in the migrant farm working community this year, and I don't know if there are other stats.
I don't have any other stats, but I will say I was involved with the Mohsen Madawi incident where he was taken into custody and was
down Brattleboro.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they were trying to move him out of the country.
Yeah.
And the reason that they didn't is because we had a lot of brave people step forward. Becca White, Senator Becca White from Windsor, who's on my leadership team, she was the forefront of that effort, and it was successful. He's been able to finish his college degree, and he remains here, and he is a beloved figure in his community. No reason at all for him to be targeted, and that's just one example of what's happening to tens of thousands of hardworking people around the country.
Yeah. Let's move into the federal impacts a little bit. Although I did want to ask you about the ICE involvement and the use of Vermont prisons before I jump. That was what.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that. That was some conversation that went on.
So Vermont, like all states, has a contract with ICE to allow them to use our prisons as detention facilities, usually on their way to taking the person somewhere else, ultimately. Our prisons are overcrowded, number one, and we didn't feel in the Senate that we needed to be working with ICE to detain people who were not Vermonters or not being charged in Vermont.
And is it true in Vermont prisons that we don't have a differentiation between sort of jail and prison, pre-sentence and sentenced folks?
You do have
have
detained people pre-sentencing in prisons.
Mixed in with folks who are, so anybody that's picked up by ICE is put into general population with folks that have been sentenced.
I don't know if I would say it that specifically because I haven't checked where they're detained, but I would say that they are, ICE is using Vermont in the way that it's using other states as a way station to taking people out of the country and often to third countries for reasons that completely escape me, sending them to war-torn countries in Africa, for instance. So, so what we called for in the Senate was for the governor to either refuse to renew that contract, for which we were not fairly compensated as well, or to add conditions that we would only detain or house people who were Vermonters or charged in Vermont. He did not go along with us. He saw it differently, and his administration has now renewed the contract. They've gotten a little more money, a few more dollars a day, but no restrictions on ICE being able to use our prisons as a way station. And I think that is a horrible mistake.
Is there any indication, is there any communication between your leadership and the governor about why? What's the reasoning?
They, you know, I don't want to speak for them. My impression has been that Phil Scott is more or less trying to keep his head down because with Trump, when you stick your head up, he tends to get in an ADHD kind of way. He tends to get triggered and focuses on you and maybe takes money away or makes your life difficult.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that's how you wind up with a regime that you can no longer resist, is by going along and going along.
Let's talk a little bit about the federal funding hits and where Vermont is in terms of responding to those federal threats. And the more specifics we can have around like the impact on SNAP benefits, what's happening with HUD, housing money, the CDC, and really what I'm wondering is Vermont ready to take a leadership role in responding? Doesn't sound like it from the governor's point of view, but are Vermont Democrats ready to take a leadership role in responding to these federal actions? Or are we taking a wait and see attitude?
A leadership role in what sense?
In scenario planning, or are we waiting? Are we going to wait and see what's happening?
Well, we have been proactive for sure.
Okay, talk about
I
that.
thought you meant in opposing legally what's going on.
Well, I know there's been some, yeah.
Yeah, Charity Clark, our Attorney General,
Yeah.
has been very, very active, and she's launched, I believe, 27 lawsuits against the Trump administration. So she's taking a leadership role for sure.
And how does that feed into the legislative work?
So we had no doubt that we were going to take hits to our budget. So we balance the budget every year in Vermont. I don't know if people know that, but it is not easy to do. But it is generally regarded all across the building as something that we cannot fail to do. So we balanced the budget, but we understood that the federal government was now in the business of pulling back appropriations that had already been made, rescissions, all sorts of unprecedented pressures, and I would say in some situations blackmail to get policy outcomes by keeping dollars out of the pockets of states that need them. So what we did was we set up the budget with a series of targets, percentage targets. If the federal allotments in a certain area fall below a certain level, then our emergency board, which is a committee made up of our money chairs, finance, appropriations, ways and means, and appropriations in the two bodies, and then the governor. That's the emergency board.
And is this new? Is this emergency board new in relation?
No.
Has it been around for a long time?
It's been around for a long time.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And so what they are empowered to do under this is move a certain amount of money on their own say-so, that group of five, if we're out of session. But then if the rescissions go too far and they become too deep, then we come back into session to deal with that. And no matter what happens between now and January, in January we will be faced with SNAP cuts and other cuts, and those advocates will come to us and say, we have to figure out a way to make us whole again.
So has the emergency board taken any action in response to
Don't
federal
believe so
cuts?
yet.
Okay. And then you have the Joint Fiscal Committee that's had a listening session about federal impacts.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about, like, what are people specifically saying, activists, organizations, nonprofits, or individuals to you all that's like, that you're hearing?
Well, I mean, let's just look at public television, right? So public television were originally targeted by the administration. Then they got Republicans with
Which
their...
is not us, by the way, for those who are watching. We're not public television, but Vermont Public, yeah.
But they got us to, or they got Republicans to rescind the money that goes to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Correct, yeah.
And so that's a huge hit for those stations. And we, on the other hand, in Vermont...
It caused the Corporation for Public Broadcasting to fold, right? As far as I know.
The federal actions.
Yeah.
Yes.
And all of that money and programming.
Right.
Goodbye.
Right. So that's what the federal government is doing.
Yeah.
But this past session and the session before, we began a process of creating a budget in the Secretary of State's budget for PEG, for the community television stations, including this one.
Yeah.
And we upped that money last year.
Yeah.
We will up it again this year toward a final target amount. But the reason we're doing that is because we believe that stations like this are part of the antidote to what we're seeing on the federal side. That is consolidation of news and the disinformation that we're seeing through social media and traditional media outlets.
We are running out of time. We had invited, we will be having a conversation with the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader this week as well, and we invited you to pose a question to them and for them to pose a question to you. And the question from them came that as leaders, we both spend a lot of time building consensus. From your perspective, what's an example of this where your leadership in the Senate and the leadership in the House aligned to deliver results for Vermonters?
I'll give you a quick example, and that's kids code. So that's what we call it. It's a piece of legislation that passed this past session, and it was designed to change the rules by which social media companies can hook your kid on their product. And so among other things, endless scrolling, right, where there's no bottom of the page, you can just keep scrolling. Notifications that come in after, you know, the kids are supposed to be in bed. So those are ways that those companies seek to work their way into your kids' lives.
Yep.
So Kids Code 2 years ago was on its way to being passed, but there was a problem, a disagreement in the House and the Senate over the private right of action. Should citizens be able to sue if these things are breached by these companies? And originally the Senate's position was no, and the House's position was yes. We finally decided that if we were going to get where we were going to go, we were going to have to come together, and so we, House and Senate leadership, managed to come up with a direction that the committees followed, and we wound up with Kids Code this past session, signed into law, and that's protecting our kids even as we speak. I think more than anything, it's about, at the end of the day, saying what differentiates us from the other party on the one hand, and from the state of affairs as it is now, which can't continue. So how can we get the most as Democrats together, working together, and that means you don't get 100% of what you want.
One of the things that I think is amazing about the Vermont legislature is the amount of people that are in that building, the amount of testimony that different committees hear, really the amount of what feels like camaraderie.
Yeah.
Or has felt like camaraderie, and you know, there's different questions about whether that's shifting along with kind of prevailing political tensions. I guess there's sort of two questions on here, and what are you doing in terms of leadership to counteract those prevailing tensions, political tensions, and then who are you not hearing from that you need to hear from? I'm thinking about data privacy, AI. You know, corporate interests that have the ability to be in the building. Who are you not hearing from that you need to be hearing from on issues?
Hard to say. It's like, what things are not making you sick? Like, I mean, you can think about it, but what I would say is that YouTube has allowed us unprecedented input from people around the state. So remote testimony has been a huge boon to people with issues across the spectrum. So, you know, if somebody decides they're living in Brattleboro and they want to testify for 15 minutes on something, they can hop on YouTube and
Zoom, but
Zoom.
Yeah.
And that will be archived, and you can go back and see every committee hearing. When I came in 15 years ago, there was maybe a sound recording that was going on. Some committees did, some committees didn't. It was
Get it
very
on a CD or something.
it was very hit or miss. But now every single committee, in fact, if the technology breaks down, if Zoom doesn't work that day for some reason, we cancel the hearing. And the same with floor action. It's all available, it's all archived. You can't participate if you're not a senator, but you can certainly follow along. We've always had VPR providing the audio, but now you can watch in real time.
So you feel like you're hearing from the folks that you need to be hearing from to prepare yourself for this upcoming.
I think there are always groups and populations that are silent for different reasons. People who are here, migrant workers, I've worked with them in the past. For instance, one of my first bills was a bill to create driver privilege cards so that these people could get around and get food and medical attention. But we tend to hear not enough from them and about them because they're scared. And with ICE as aggressively postured as they are now, they're scared with reason. So we try to go to them and we try to work through migrant justice and other groups, but you know, it's a challenge.
my understanding with the legislature is one of your biggest charges is to deliver the budget.
Yes.
What do you think is going to happen in this upcoming year? And is there a sense, there's this question of a 3% cap on spending that the governor's asked for from?
He always does.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's not a new thing this
No,
year.
3% is almost always his target. It's getting harder and harder for them to hit that target because, among other things, healthcare costs are exploding. So we did signature work last year on healthcare costs. Senator Ginny Lyons, I just want to give a shout out to. She did fine work. So among other things, we adopted something called reference-based pricing, which allows lower pricing for services. And then we
Check services around the state to make sure they're in line with one another? Is that what it does? Or it's like,
well, yes, in a
Okay.
way. But the other piece of it is that hospitals and health insurers, both in financial trouble. So if you're Blue Cross Blue Shield and you're a hospital, Blue Cross Blue Shield wants more money, but if you pay that, the hospital goes into receivership. And so you're trying to find the sweet spot. And so we passed legislation designed to make hospitals more robust in their funding and to allow more money in a certain stream to Blue Cross Blue Shield, which was having its own issues. So it's a balancing act.
so you're ready for another year? You're ready for another few years?
I would say
This is exciting work, exhausting work.
it's the best work I've
energizing?
ever
Okay.
done.
Yeah.
And it's very fulfilling. It's draining. You know, and you and I were talking before we went on camera. You know, I'm coming into my mid-60s. So every time I think about going back to the voters for their say-so again, it's a decision now. But like I say, we're in very, very strange and tough times, and the Senate is now populated by a lot of people without a lot of experience. And so, you know, that's what I try to balance is my needs in my own life with my own family and what the state needs.
Yeah, well, not for nothing, we are working with a young intern from Champlain College who just said today, people want leadership in the state. People
Yeah.
want leadership to tell us which way the wind is blowing and,
Right.
you know, do I need to take the shots and do I need to, like, how am I going to respond to this, you know, ever-changing landscape from the federal government?
And inevitably, states are going to have to step forward. As on the vaccine question, a consortium of New England states has come together and said, look, we will provide recommendations.
And Vermont is part of that.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Senator Baruth. Thank you for your time today.
Sure, Megan.
Just being able to touch a moment into some of these issues. The
Yeah.
legislature will start up again in January. Thank you all for watching. This is Under the Dome. For this and other programs, you can turn into cctv.org. Be well.